Lieutenant Peter Walsh wiped his sweaty palms on his uniform as he stood in the U.S. Frontier's meeting chamber. The ship's lights dimmed slightly, signaling that their alien guests would arrive any moment. Next to him, Commander Linda Carter straightened her back and gave him a reassuring nod. This was humanity's first official diplomatic meeting with the Tsar Cathy, and everyone felt the weight of the moment. The chamber doors slid open with a soft hiss. 3 tall, silvery-skinned beings glided into the room. Their movements were graceful, almost liquid-like, and their large violet eyes seemed to take in everything at once. Behind them came 2 representatives from the Galactic Council, a green-scaled Tressan and a crystalline Moravian, who would witness this historic meeting. "Welcome aboard the U.S. Frontier," Commander Carter said, stepping forward with her hands open in the universal gesture of peace. "I am Commander Linda Carter, and this is Lieutenant Peter Walsh. We are honored to host this first official meeting between our species." The tallest Tsar Cathy inclined its head, the silver markings on its neck catching the light. "I am First Speaker Xerix," it said through the translation device. Its voice came out smooth and melodious. "We bring greetings from the Tsar Cathy Collective." Everything was going perfectly according to protocol until the ship's emergency lights suddenly flashed red. The unexpected alarm made everyone jump. Peter's hand automatically moved toward his sidearm, a reflex from years of training. In that same instant, First Speaker Xerix's guards raised their energy weapons. "No, wait," Peter started to say, but it was too late. The guards fired their weapons, bright blue energy beams shooting across the chamber. Peter felt a warm, tingling sensation as the beam passed through his chest, like stepping into a hot shower. Beside him, Commander Carter stumbled back a step but remained standing. The Galactic Council representatives weren't so lucky. The Tressan collapsed immediately, scales turning pale, while the Moravian's crystalline form went completely dark. The Tsar Cathy stared in shock. Their weapons had always been reliably effective against every known species. "Security breach in engineering. False alarm," the ship's AI announced, and the red lights stopped flashing. But the damage was done. "How are you still standing?" First Speaker Xerix demanded, its violet eyes wide with disbelief. "Those are Class 4 energy disruptors. You should be unconscious." Peter helped the fallen Tressan sit up while Commander Carter checked on the Moravian. "We felt it," she explained calmly, though her voice held a hint of surprise. "But it wasn't particularly harmful, more like a warm sensation." The Tsar Cathy guards lowered their weapons, exchanging puzzled looks. First Speaker Xerix moved closer, studying the humans with intense curiosity. "In 3,000 years of space travel, we have never encountered a species resistant to energy weapons. This is unprecedented." The ship's medical team arrived, quickly treating the affected council members. The Tressan recovered quickly, but the Moravian needed more extensive care to restore their crystalline structure. "I suggest we continue this meeting in our medical bay," Commander Carter said firmly. "We can discuss this unexpected discovery while ensuring everyone's well-being." She kept her voice steady and professional, but Peter could see the wheels turning in her mind. This revelation would change everything about humanity's place in the galactic community. As they walked to the medical bay, Peter noticed the Tsar Cathy guards keeping their distance, their hands never far from their now useless weapons. First Speaker Xerix, however, seemed more intrigued than threatened. It walked beside Commander Carter, asking questions about human biology and Earth's conditions. The false alarm in engineering had disrupted their carefully planned first contact, but it had revealed something far more important. Humans, the newcomers to the galactic stage, had an ability that no other known species possessed. Peter could already imagine how this would affect humanity's future among the stars, for better or worse. A simple meeting had turned into a pivotal moment in human history, all because of a malfunctioning alarm and some trigger-happy guards. As Peter watched the medical team treat the council members, He couldn't help but wonder what other surprises awaited humanity in the vast expanse of space. Dr. Susan Morgan stared at the holographic display floating above her desk at the Terra Nova Research Station. The cellular scan results made no sense, yet the evidence was right in front of her. She had run the tests 12 times now, and each result showed the same thing. "Ellen, come look at this," she called to her colleague. Dr. Alan Price walked over from his workstation, coffee cup in hand. His usually neat brown hair was messy from running his fingers through it all day, a sure sign he was just as puzzled as she was. "Found something?" he asked, leaning over her shoulder to look at the rotating hologram of human nerve cells exposed to Zarkathi energy weapons. "Watch what happens when I simulate the energy blast," Susan said, tapping a few controls. A hologram showed the energy weapons beam hitting the human cells. Instead of disrupting them, the energy seemed to flow around them like water around rocks in a stream. "That's impossible," Alan muttered, putting down his coffee cup. "Energy weapons work by disrupting neural pathways. They should be shutting down these cells completely." Susan nodded, pulling up another simulation. "Look at these readings from the Tresson subject for comparison." The new hologram showed alien cells instantly shutting down when hit with the same energy blast. Their cells absorbed the energy and stopped functioning. Ours just redirected. 3 Zarkathi scientists watched from the other side of the lab, their violet eyes reflecting the hologram's blue light. They had arrived at Terra Nova 2 days ago, after the incident on the U.S. frontier made headlines across the galaxy. The lead Zarkathi scientist, Nexel, glided over to their workstation. "May I?" it asked, gesturing to the controls. Susan nodded, and Nexel's long fingers danced over the holographic interface, adding new data to the simulation. "We have tested our weapons against 73 different species," Nexel explained, its translator making its musical language understandable. Every species showed the same response as the Tresson cells. Until now. The expanded simulation showed various alien cell structures all failing under the energy weapons attack. The human cells stood out like a bright exception to a universal rule. "It's something to do with Earth itself," Alan said suddenly, walking quickly to his own workstation. "Susan, remember that study we did last year on human adaptation to background radiation?" Susan's eyes widened as she followed his train of thought. "Pull up the radiation resistance patterns," she said, already typing commands into her console. "Compare them to the energy weapon deflection patterns." The 2 sets of data appeared side by side in the air. The similarity was striking. The way human cells handled background radiation from Earth matched almost exactly how they redirected the energy weapons blasts. "Your planet's unusual radiation levels," Nexel observed, its voice carrying a note of awe. "They forced your species to develop unique cellular protection mechanisms during your evolution. Our weapons work on the same principles as radiation damage. So we're naturally resistant," Susan finished. She sat back in her chair, letting out a long breath. Millions of years of evolution on a planet with higher background radiation than most habitable worlds gave us built-in energy weapon shields. Alan was already writing up their findings, his fingers flying over his keyboard. "This is going to change everything we thought we knew about human physiology in space," he said, "and it's definitely going to change how the galaxy sees us." One of the other Zarkathi scientists made a sound that the translator didn't catch, but Susan thought it sounded worried. She understood why. Their species' main defensive and offensive technology had just been proven useless against humans. "We should focus on the medical implications first," Susan said carefully, seeing the concern in the Zarkathi scientists' expressions. "This could help us develop better radiation treatments for all species, maybe even adapt our cellular protection mechanisms to help others." Nexel's worried expression softened. "Yes," it agreed. "This discovery could benefit everyone, if we approach it wisely." The scientist turned to look out the laboratory window at the red sands of Mars stretching to the horizon. "Though I suspect some will see it differently." Susan followed Nexel's gaze, thinking about how this discovery would affect humanity's place in the galaxy. They had just found out that humans had an ability no other known species possessed. She hoped they would use this knowledge to build bridges rather than walls. Colonel Frank Martinez walked through the holographic battlefield simulation, studying the blue figures of human soldiers and the red figures of various alien species. Captain Diana Wright followed close behind him, making notes on her tablet as they observed the tactical scenarios playing out around them. "Run it again," Frank ordered. The simulation reset, showing a squad of human Marines facing off against Zarkathi troops. This time, when the Zarkathi fired their energy weapons, the human soldiers pushed forward instead of taking cover. The energy blasts passed through them with minimal effect, allowing them to close the distance quickly. "Our troops are still hesitating," Diana pointed out, freezing the simulation with a gesture. "See here, they're acting on instinct, trying to dodge weapons that can't hurt them. We need to retrain their basic responses." Frank nodded, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "It goes against everything they've learned about combat. Taking fire without seeking cover feels wrong, even when you know the weapons can't harm you." The observation room door slid open, and a Zarkathi military observer named Kelrix entered. Its silver skin seemed to shimmer under the holographic lights as it joined them in analyzing the simulation. "Your adaptation is impressive," Kelrix said, its translator making its musical language sound almost mechanical. "But you should know that our military is already developing new conventional weapons to counter this advantage." "We expected that," Frank replied calmly. "But converting an entire military infrastructure from energy weapons to projectile weapons will take time. Time we can use to establish a stronger position in the galaxy." Diana waved her hand, bringing up a new simulation. This one showed human ships moving through space, absorbing energy weapon fire from alien vessels while closing to point-blank range. "Our ship designs are being modified too. We're removing some of the energy shielding we don't need and replacing it with extra armor against conventional weapons." The three of them watched as the simulated human ships demonstrated their new tactics. Without having to worry about energy weapons, they could get much closer to enemy vessels than any other species would dare. "Our concern," Kelrix said carefully, "is that this advantage might encourage some of your people to become aggressive." Frank turned to face the Zarkathi observer directly. "We understand those concerns. That's why we're being completely open with you about our tactical developments. We want to avoid any misunderstandings that could lead to conflict." Diana pulled up another display, showing training programs being developed for joint human-Zarkathi operations. "We're already working on ways our forces can complement each other. Your energy weapons are still effective against every other species, and our natural resistance could make us excellent shock troops and boarding parties." Kelrix studied the display with its violet eyes, its expression unreadable to human observers. "Some among my people believe we should isolate ourselves from humans until we develop effective countermeasures. Others suggest a preemptive strike using conventional weapons." "And what do you believe?" Frank asked quietly. The Zarkathi military observer was silent for a moment before responding. "I believe that any species that evolved on a planet like Earth, surviving its harsh conditions and radiation, will not be easily defeated by any weapons. Better to have them as allies than enemies." Frank smiled slightly and gestured to the simulation of joint operations. "Then let's make sure everyone else sees it that way too. Diana, show Kelrix the new combat formations we've been working on." Diana nodded and expanded the holographic display. Human and Zarkathi troops appeared, moving in coordinated patterns that took advantage of both species' strengths. Human soldiers absorbed energy weapon fire while protecting their alien allies from conventional attacks, while Zarkathi troops used their energy weapons to handle any other species that might threaten a combined force. As they worked through the tactical scenarios, Frank couldn't help but feel optimistic. Yes, humanity's immunity to energy weapons could lead to conflict, but it could also forge stronger bonds between species. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and allies were always better than enemies. Outside the simulation room's windows, Earth hung like a blue jewel in space, a constant reminder of the unique conditions that had given humanity its unexpected advantage. Now they just had to prove they could use that advantage wisely. Ambassador Richard Cole sat in his office at the Galactic Council headquarters, reading through the latest batch of demands from various alien species. His assistant, Mary Peterson, entered the room with another stack of digital tablets, each containing more requests for human genetic data. "The Moravians are getting particularly insistent," Mary said, placing the tablets on his desk. "They're offering to trade their crystal ship technology for access to human DNA samples." Richard rubbed his tired eyes. The past week had been a constant stream of meetings, demands, and thinly veiled threats. Ever since the news about human resistance to energy weapons had spread, every species in the galaxy seemed to want a piece of humanity's genetic secrets. "Tell them the same thing we've told everyone else," he said. "We're happy to participate in joint research projects, but we won't allow unrestricted access to human genetic material." Mary nodded, but her expression was worried. She pulled up a holographic display showing security camera footage from various human colonies. "Sir, there's something else you need to see. We've detected unusual movement patterns near our outer settlements, ships that don't match known configurations." The footage showed dark, sleek vessels hovering near human outposts. They weren't military ships. They were too small and moved too cautiously. Richard leaned forward, studying the images with growing concern. "Smugglers?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Worse," Mary replied. "We think they're kidnapping ships. 3 human colonists disappeared last week. The local authorities thought they were normal missing persons cases until we noticed the pattern." Richard stood up and walked to the window overlooking the vast Galactic Council complex. Alien representatives from hundreds of species walked through the gardens below, their different forms creating a living rainbow of colors and shapes. "They're getting desperate," he said quietly. "Everyone wants to understand how we resist energy weapons, and some groups aren't willing to wait for official channels." A soft chime announced the arrival of a Zar-Cathy delegation. First Speaker Xerix entered the office, accompanied by 2 advisors. Their silver skin gleamed under the office lights as they took their seats in the specially designed chairs that accommodated their tall, graceful forms. "Ambassador Cole," Xerix began, its translator making its musical voice sound formal and precise, "we have received disturbing reports from our intelligence network. Several criminal organizations are planning coordinated attempts to acquire human test subjects." Mary quickly pulled up more security footage, this time showing suspicious activities near Earth itself. "They're getting bolder," she noted. "These ships were spotted just outside our solar system's security perimeter." Richard's expression hardened. "We need to send a clear message. Any attempt to kidnap human citizens will be considered an act of war against Earth." "We agree," Xerix said, surprising both humans. "The Zar-Cathy Collective will support this position. We cannot allow criminal elements to destabilize our growing alliance." As they discussed security measures, Mary's tablet suddenly lit up with urgent messages. "Sir, we've just received word of an attempted kidnapping at the Beta Colony. A group of unknown aliens tried to grab some colonists, but—" She paused, a slight smile appearing on her face. "They made the mistake of using energy weapons. The colonists escaped easily." Richard couldn't help but smile too, though the situation was serious. "That's something at least. Our natural resistance makes us harder targets than they expected." "Nevertheless," Xerix added, "we should increase joint patrols around human settlements. The next group might come better prepared." The meeting continued late into the day as they planned new security measures. Outside, the artificial sun of the Galactic Council station began to dim, creating a beautiful artificial sunset. Richard watched the play of colors across the silver skin of his Zar-Cathy allies, grateful that at least one powerful species was standing with humanity during this crisis. "Mary," he said as the meeting wound down, "send word to all human colonies. Tell them to be on high alert, but also let them know they're not alone. We have friends out here among the stars, even if we also have some new enemies. Lieutenant Kelly Barnes stood at the bridge of the U.S. frontier, watching as 3 Zarkathi warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly in front of them. These weren't the sleek diplomatic vessels she was used to seeing. These ships bristled with weapons, and not the usual energy-based ones. They're charging weapons, her sensor operator called out, reading multiple missile launchers and kinetic weapon systems. No energy weapons detected. Kelly's hands tightened on the rail. The radical faction of the Zarkathi military had finally made their move. Status of the colony? She asked, keeping her voice steady for her crew. New Haven Colony reports all civilians are in the underground shelters, her communications officer replied. But there are still 200 alien tourists and traders in the spaceport, mostly Tressans and Moravians. The lead Zarkathi ship broadcast a message across all frequencies. This is Commander Varix of the True Path. Surrender the colony, or we will demonstrate that humans can die just as easily as any other species. Kelly pressed the broadcast button on her chair. This is Lieutenant Barnes of the U.S. frontier. There are innocent civilians from multiple species in that colony. Stand down, and we can discuss this peacefully. The answer came in the form of a missile launch. Dozens of projectiles streaked toward the colony, their trails cutting bright lines across space. Intercept those missiles, Kelly ordered. The Frontier's point defense systems came alive, shooting down the incoming projectiles. But some got through, striking the colony's outer defensive dome. The transparent barrier held, but cracks appeared in its surface. 2 more Zarkathi ships dropping out of FTL behind us, her tactical officer reported. We're surrounded. Kelly quickly assessed their options. The Frontier could withstand energy weapons, but these ships weren't using them. They had adapted, just as everyone feared they would. But Kelly had anticipated this. Launch our new drones, she ordered. Small, unmanned craft shot out from the Frontier's launch bays. They looked harmless, barely bigger than escape pods. Commander Varix's voice came over the comm again. Your automated defenses cannot stop all of our weapons. Surrender now and... The voice cut off as Kelly's drones activated. Each one generated a massive energy field, similar to the Zarkathi's usual weapons. The enemy ship's crews, not being human, were suddenly hit with the same kind of disruption they had once used against others. Direct hit, her tactical officer reported with satisfaction. Enemy crews are being incapacitated by their own preferred weapon type. But the victory was short-lived. One of the Zarkathi ships, its crew fighting through the effects, fired a spread of kinetic rounds that tore through the Frontier's hull. Warning alarms blared across the bridge. Hull breach on Deck 4. Someone shouted. Emergency force fields holding. Kelly opened a channel to the colony. New Haven Control. This is Frontier. Begin emergency evacuation of all alien civilians. Get them to the radiation shelters. They'll be protected from the energy fields there. She watched as shuttles began ferrying alien civilians to the colony's deep bunkers. The Zarkathi ships, their crews struggling against the energy fields, fired wildly. Some shots hit the colony's dome, creating more cracks in its surface. Ma'am, detecting multiple new ships dropping out of FTL, her sensor operator called out. Kelly held her breath, expecting more enemies. Instead, she saw the familiar shapes of both human and loyal Zarkathi vessels appearing around them. This is Admiral Nexel of the Zarkathi Defense Fleet, a new voice announced. Commander Varix, you and your followers are guilty of attacking civilians and violating our alliance with humanity. Stand down immediately. Kelly smiled as she saw the rebel ships, caught between her drone's energy fields and the combined human Zarkathi fleet, power down their weapons. The crisis wasn't over, but the worst had been prevented. All ships, this is Frontier, she broadcast. Begin rescue operations. Let's show everyone in the galaxy what humans and Zarkathi can accomplish when we work together instead of fighting each other. As she watched human and Zarkathi rescue ships moving to help both the colony and the disabled rebel vessels, Kelly realized that today's battle would send a powerful message. Humanity's resistance to energy weapons hadn't started a war. It had helped forge an even stronger peace. Dr. Susan Morgan stared at her computer screen with wide eyes. After months of research, the final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. She quickly called up Dr. Alan Price on the lab's communication system, and within minutes, he rushed into her office at the Terra Nova research station. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the complex diagram on her screen. "Earth's background radiation didn't just make us resistant to energy weapons. It completely changed how our cells handle energy itself." Alan leaned closer, his eyes scanning the data. The screen showed a detailed comparison between human cells and those of other species, specifically how they processed different types of energy. "Our cells don't just deflect the energy," he said slowly, understanding dawning on his face. "They absorb it and redirect it. That's why we feel warm instead of pain when hit by energy weapons." Commander Howard Phillips walked into the lab, followed by the Zarkathi chief scientist, Nexel. After the recent crisis, both species had committed to deeper scientific cooperation. "You found something?" Howard asked, noticing the excitement in the room. Susan nodded and projected a larger hologram of her findings. "We finally understand why humans are different. Our ancestors evolved on a planet with unique radiation patterns. Over millions of years, our cells developed ways to use that radiation instead of being harmed by it." Nexel moved closer to the hologram, its silver skin reflecting the blue light of the display. "This is remarkable," it said through its translator. "Your cells don't fight against the energy. They work with it." "Exactly," Susan replied. "And we think we can use this knowledge to help other species." She pulled up another display showing modified energy shielding designs. "If we copy how human cells handle energy, we can create better protection for everyone." Howard studied the designs with interest. "So we could make ships and armor that redirect energy weapons instead of just blocking them." "Even better," Alan added, bringing up his own research. "We might be able to help other species develop similar resistance, not as strong as humans have, but enough to reduce the effectiveness of energy weapons against anyone." Nexel's violet eyes widened. "You would share this technology, even though it's your species' greatest advantage. An advantage isn't worth much if it leads to fear and conflict," Susan said softly. "Better to use our knowledge to protect everyone." The lab's door opened again as more scientists arrived, human and alien alike. Word of the breakthrough had spread quickly. Susan watched as her colleagues from different species gathered around the displays, asking questions and offering suggestions. "Look at this part of the energy pattern," a Tressan scientist pointed out, his green scales shimmering under the lab lights. "If we modify our ship's shields to match it, we could create a hybrid system." A Moravian researcher finished, her crystalline form sparkling with excitement, combining human energy redirection with traditional shield technology. Howard smiled as he watched the scientists working together. "This is what we hoped for," he said to Nexel. "Not just humans teaching others, but all species combining their knowledge to create something new." Susan turned to her computer and began typing rapidly. "I'm sending these findings to all major research centers," she announced. "The more minds we have working on this, the better the results will be." As the day went on, the lab buzzed with activity. Scientists from a dozen species worked side by side, combining their knowledge and experience. On screens around the room, simulations showed new shield designs, medical treatments, and protective systems, all based on humanity's unique cellular structure. Outside the lab's windows, the red Martian sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Susan took a moment to watch it, thinking about how far they'd come. What had started as a potential source of conflict had transformed into an opportunity for unprecedented cooperation. "Maybe this was the real gift Earth gave us," she said quietly to Alan. "Not just the ability to resist energy weapons, but the chance to show the galaxy a better way forward. The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council sparkled with light reflecting off the crystalline walls. Ambassador Richard Cole stood at the signing table, looking out at the assembled representatives of over 200 alien species. Next to him, the Zarkathi High Council members waited with their own copies of the Terra-Zarkathi Accord. 1 year ago, Richard began, his voice carrying across the silent hall. A simple misunderstanding led to an amazing discovery. Today, that discovery brings us together in ways we never imagined possible. In the audience, Lieutenant Peter Walsh and Commander Linda Carter sat in their dress uniforms. They had witnessed the first contact incident that started everything, and now they were here to see its final positive outcome. The High Council's leader, Supreme Speaker Zurix, stepped forward. The path to this moment was not easy, it said, its translator conveying the musical tones of its language. We faced fear, conflict, and the temptation to let our differences divide us. Instead, we chose to learn from each other. Richard picked up the ceremonial pen, its metal surface etched with symbols from both human and Zarkathi languages. On the massive screens around the hall, images showed the results of their cooperation. New colonies where humans and aliens lived together, ships with combined human and Zarkathi crews, and research stations where scientists of all species worked side by side. With this accord, Richard continued, we formally established the Joint Defense Initiative. Our ships will patrol together. Our scientists will research together, and our people will build the future together. He signed his name on the document. The pen's ink changed color as he wrote, shifting from earth sky blue to the deep violet of Zarkathi eyes. Supreme Speaker Zurix signed next, its elegant script flowing across the page. From her seat in the audience, Dr. Susan Morgan washed with pride. The research she and her colleagues had done was already changing lives across the galaxy. The new hybrid shield technology, based on human cellular structure, protected ships and colonies of all species. But more importantly, their work had shown that differences could become strengths when shared. Colonel Frank Martinez stood at attention with other military officers, both human and alien. The joint patrols had already proved their worth, combining human resistance to energy weapons with Zarkathi advanced technology. Pirates and criminals found it much harder to operate when faced with crews that could counter any weapon they used. Let this accord stand as proof, Supreme Speaker Zurix announced, that the greatest discoveries can come from the most unexpected places. Earth's unique conditions gave humans their special ability, but it was their choice to share that ability that truly made them special. As the audience applauded, Mary Peterson, still serving as Richard's assistant, checked her tablet. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy. Celebrations on dozens of worlds, messages of support from other species, and news of more successful joint operations. The ceremony continued as other species representatives came forward to sign their own alliance agreements. The hall filled with the sounds of different languages, all expressing the same hope for the future. Later, at the celebration reception, Peter Walsh found himself standing next to Commander Linda Carter, both of them watching the mixed crowd of humans and aliens mingling peacefully. "Did you ever think that alarm malfunction would lead to all this?" he asked her, remembering the day when Zarkathi energy weapons had first passed harmlessly through them. Linda smiled, accepting a drink from a hovering service drone. "Sometimes the best things come from accidents," she said, "but it's what we choose to do afterward that really matters." Outside the council hall's massive windows, ships from dozens of species flew in formation. Human vessels flew alongside Zarkathi ships, their different designs complementing each other. The ships' energy shields glowed faintly, showing the new hybrid technology that protected them all equally. Richard watched the display from the reception hall, thinking about how far they'd come. What had started as a potential source of conflict had become the foundation for a stronger, more united galaxy, Earth's gift to humanity. Their unique resistance to energy weapons had turned out to be a gift to all species once they learned to share it.